Ladies and gentlemen, it is an absolute privilege to be here and talk to you today. This is the first time that I have visited your beautiful city. Myself and my colleague got here yesterday afternoon, and just wow. Absolutely, we have been such tourists in about the 12 hours we've been here, taking photos of everyone. We've managed to do a bus tour. We're here a little bit of time tomorrow as well, so we're cramming in as much as we can. But I will move on from my new role as an unofficial spokesman for the Budapest Tourism Board and talk to you today about what we are moving on to. Here we go. Why am I here today? So my name is Lynsey Brydson, and I am Head of Digital Programs at Built Environment Smarter Transformation. And I've been asked today to talk to you about what we're doing in Scotland. So I'm going to talk to you, a few things I'm going to cover. I'm going to cover about who Built Environment Smarter Transformation, or BEST, as I'm going to refer to them now on because it's shorter. Talk about what we do. I'm going to talk about innovation and entrepreneurship in Scotland. I've been asked to do a bit of scene setting, but why should we focus on cities at all? What's the imperative for change there? And I'm also going to look at case studies and recommendations from Scotland. So to move on to who are Built Environment Smarter Transformation, why have I been asked to speak to you? So Built Environment Smarter Transformation is an innovation centre. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more in a wee bit about the Innovation Centre programme and what that is. But basically that means we are a publicly funded body, and we are publicly funded by the Scottish Government to look at innovation and promote innovation within construction in the built environment. And what you can see up here, this is the outcomes. We had a rebrand recently. We were previously known as Construction Scotland Innovation Centre, and we rebranded in May. And this is where we were looking at really at the whole purpose of the Innovation Centre. And you can see here some of the issues that we came up with. But the bit I'd really like to focus on, and that is our mission. So our mission is to accelerate the built environment's transition to zero carbon. Not net zero, zero carbon, which is harder. So we've made a bit of a rod for our own back there. But the reason that we've done that is because, as some of the speakers have already mentioned, there is so much need for change right now. And the built environment, certainly in the UK, and I imagine this is true elsewhere as well, we're a huge contributor to the carbon emissions. In the UK, for example, the built environment generates 50% of the UK's waste. That is not a great figure to have. So what do we do at the Innovation Centre? So as I said, we're publicly funded, and we have 4 areas of focus because we do have to narrow it down a bit. Innovation is quite a wide field. So we look at digital, which there that I'm involved in, digital transformation. We look at sustainability. We look at modern methods of construction, which is things like off-site manufacturing. And we look at retrofit as well. One of the previous speakers mentioned that only 20% of your houses in Budapest have the correct level of insulation. Unfortunately, in the UK, we are also in a very similar position. We have the worst performing building stock in Europe. That's not sort of competition we particularly want to win. Underpinning all these areas, we have what we call our sort of culture change and behavioural programmes, because if we don't address the culture, if we don't address behaviours, we won't be able to get anywhere. And we also have a heavy focus on skills as well. Working within all those different areas, there are 4 things that we like to focus on. We have what we call connected ecosystems, and that's basically breaking down the barriers. In the UK, the built environment is quite traditional. It's not particularly collaborative at times, unfortunately. Don't get me wrong, there are organisations out there who are very up for collaborating and working with firms that previously may have been seen as their competitors. So we do quite a lot of work in breaking those barriers down. Every one of our programmes has to have a collaborative element to it. Events like this are a great example of connected ecosystems, and we do quite a lot of those as well. We also look at innovation programmes. We are funded. We can fund innovation programmes, so we do quite a lot of work in that area as well. But we can also work with external sources of funding, such as UK Research Institute, the Scottish Government, for example. It works in quite a lot of different ways. And we look at future skills, because we have a big skills crisis in the industry in the UK in terms of new entrants coming into the industry, but also in terms of upskilling the workforce that we already have. And the final thing we look at is our innovation factory, which I'll show you pictures of in a little minute. But we have in our premises of Hamilton, which is, if you know Scotland, it's just south of Glasgow. We have currently a 35,000 square feet prototyping facility filled with state-of-the-art equipment the industry can come and try and undertake R&D on. That space is just about double because we've just actually purchased another building as well. So we're just about to move to an innovation campus rather than an innovation centre. So looking at having said all that, what does an innovation centre look like? Well, it can look like this, not dissimilar to what we've got going on here today. This is from an event we did in May, where we do dozens of events every year, but we do 2 big scale events every year. So this was our one in May, talking about being the change within the built environment. Little bit of a plug here. If anyone is in Scotland on 25th of October, we're doing our next large-scale event where we have over 500 delegates signed up. All our events are free, so if you'd like to come and join us if you're in the country, please come along. So we do a lot of work on aspects like this. Or it can look like this, and this is the innovation factory again that I was telling you about, and this is a prototype we were building for one of our projects. This is a prototype using Scottish timber, which Scottish timber traditionally can't be used as a building material for multiple reasons. So we've now proved that it can be if you treat it the right way. So we have a lot of hands-on construction being done in the factory as well. Or it can look like this. This is a signing that we did in our centre last year during COP26, which was held in Glasgow. And this is where the UN, Economic Commission for Europe, has a programme called High Performing Building Centres of Excellence. And that is a global network of organisations who are, based on what it said, they're looking to perform high-performing buildings. We are one of the more recent sign-ups to that network, and that gives us access to like-minded organisations who are working in Europe, in America, Australia, and what you can see here is some of the delegates who signed up there, along with representatives from the UN. Finally, it can look like this. I mentioned skills. We do a lot of work with skills training. This is a project that was run called Low Carbon Learning in our factory. And through this, we have trained so far over 2,500 people. And it's all free. It's all fully funded by the Scottish Government. What is being trained here, I think, is Passive House, which is an inherently low building technique. And what this has worked at has basically looking to upskill the requirements we have because our buildings need more focus on this. So we have a lot of work on the skills aspect as well. So what does that achieve? So here you can see our impact to date. We have been established for 8 years now, and you see here from a project value of around about £43 million, not all invested by us, a lot of this is from industry as well. You can see we have thousands of jobs safeguarded, new jobs created, substantial numbers of products, models and services launched to market, and also revenue added and cost savings as well. And the reason we focus on this quite a lot, and it's not to boast, although we are very proud of what we do at Best, but to prove that innovation works. What we have in the industry, as I said, it can be quite traditional, and we sometimes get pushback from organisations who say they can't afford to do R&D. Well, we can point to stats like this and say, yes, you can, and in fact, you have to, because competitors are coming. The construction industry is probably ripe for disruption within the UK. We are starting to see that coming through, and figures like this really demonstrate the benefits of how that works. So now I'm going to move on to innovation and entrepreneurship and what we're doing in Scotland. But just before I get onto that, I just noticed when I was doing research for this presentation, I noticed there's actually quite a lot of similarities between our country. I mean, every Scottish school child will know about all the innovation that you undertake in Scotland. But when you look, actually, I didn't realise how much I had been in Hungary as well. So looking here, the steam engine was really refined by a Scot, James Watt, who apparently, I found out on the bus trip yesterday, there was a statue of him at your railway station, which was a nice link. But also it was a Hungarian who invented the first electric tram. Looking at the world of entertainment, there's a Scot who invented the TV, but it was a Hungarian who invented the plasma screen. Probably most people in this room have one of them now. Moving on to medicine, a Scot, admittedly accidentally, discovered penicillin, but it was a Hungarian who discovered vitamin C and the importance of what that does. And finally, in a bit more random connection, we have Dolly the sheep and a Rubik's Cube. If you don't know who Dolly the sheep was, Dolly was the world's first cloned mammal, cloned by the Roslin Institute in Edinburgh. And I think everyone knows what a Rubik's Cube is. The connection for me here is I actually have a degree in zoology. Like Mr. Mayor, I did not have a straight career path into the world of construction. But I can safely say I will never understand how to clone an animal. Equally, I'm fairly sure I will never understand how to do a Rubik's Cube. If there's anyone in the audience who has managed that, fair play to you. I would take my hat off to you. But looking at what are we doing now in Scotland, so there's quite a lot going on. We want to maintain that tradition of innovation. So I mentioned that we are an innovation centre, and that's a programme that the Scottish Government established about 10 years ago. We were one of the newer innovation centres, so we've only been on the go for 8 years. And there's 7 innovation centres in Scotland, all working in different areas. And these are areas that they've been identified because they're of key strategic importance to the Scottish economy. So we have an innovation, for example, centre called Data Lab, and they just work with data. We have a census, work with IoT and sensors. There's a couple who look like sort of medical areas, and there's one that looks at biotechnology. It's a substantial investment in public funds, and also the way that all the Innovation Centre works is going back to that process of collaboration. We work with industry, we work with our academics. We have some really great universities and colleges in Scotland, and we work with the private and public sector to pull that all together, and again, just try and break down the barriers as much as we can. Moving to entrepreneurships, this is something that the government has recently recognised we could do better as a country, to be honest. There was a big consultation run by the government earlier this year about how we can get entrepreneurship back into universities and colleges. So we're waiting for the outcomes of that to see what recommendations we take forward. But Scotland now has a chief entrepreneur, has been appointed, a man called Mark Logan. Mark is the founder of the Skyscanner website, which some of you may have used. It looks at flight comparisons. But Mark also wrote this report called the Scottish Technology Ecosystem Review. And it's specifically looking about how we can increase the number of tech startups in Scotland. And Mr. Mayor, I would agree with your point. A part of a smart city, it's not about the tech, it's about the people. But we don't have the people coming through in Scotland. We need to work on that aspect. This is a really, really good report and is now being put into policy by the government. And while it focuses on tech ecosystem, to be honest, the conclusions are actually applicable if you want to increase startups in multiple areas. This would be a really good report to look at. And finally, we have procurement. Now, procurement and innovation are certainly in the UK are not things that have really gone hand in hand. We quite often get told that procurement is a barrier to innovation, and I'll be honest, that's a valid viewpoint. But the government has established this programme called CivTech. Now this is where public sector bodies come up with challenges and then CivTech takes those out to people and go and fix it. And it's been on the go for 7 years now. In the first 6 years, there were 64 challenges put forward by various public sector bodies. Over 90% of the applicants are either startups or SMEs. They are then supported to go through an exploration stage. If they're successful at that stage, they are then taken on to the accelerator stage. And there's more funding made available at the end so they can continue to refine their products. CivTech 7 is on the go right now, and there were £7 million worth of spend committed to that this year in public sector funding. So I think that's a really good example of how the government, and through CivTech, is looking to increase the numbers of the public sector spend and changing that view that procurement is a barrier. We really need to flip procurement so it's an enabler of innovation and not a barrier. So I was asked to do a little bit of scene setting about why focusing on cities. Now, I think everyone here is, given that you're at this forum, you've probably got a fair understanding of that. But just some facts and figures here. So why do cities need to innovate? So this is from a UN report in 2016, and at the time, over 50% of the world's population lived in cities. I was actually surprised to read how many cities of over 1 million inhabitants there are, the 512, and 31 megacities with over 10 million inhabitants in them. And that's very interesting facts and figures. And cities can be great. And this is, if you haven't been, this is Glasgow. This is the city that I lived in for over 20 years. And it's fabulous. It only moved away last year. But cities, when they're done correctly, they have beautiful architecture, great urban spaces. You can see some very busy civic spaces there as well. Glasgow has an excellent nightlife. That is a venue called SWG3, which has just installed a system where the floor takes the energy from its dancers and feeds it back into its heating system. One of the first in Europe, apparently. But cities also have problems. Again, I'm focusing on Glasgow because it's where I know. What you can see here is empty retail units. Glasgow has a big problem with the number of empty retail units right now. Across the UK, the traditional high street is seeing a challenge about how traditional retail is dying and how do our cities and towns reposition themselves so they can move forward. There are health issues in Glasgow as well. In certain areas of the city, there are big areas with alcohol misuse and with other substance misuse as well. There's inequality in the city. What you can see there, the picture with the individuals in the high vis and the snow, that's the soup kitchen, which is where they give out food to those who are in need. That was last year, over 200 people queuing in a blizzard to get food. We shouldn't have that happening in this day and age anymore. And finally, pollution. certain areas of Glasgow, Glasgow has the unfortunate honour of having the most polluted street in Scotland. Again, not a kind of competition that you want to win. And moving to the future, are people still going to live in cities? Well, yes, they are. From a UN report published this year, they estimate that 68% of the world's population are going to live in cities by 2050. To put that into figures, that is an additional 2.2 billion people living in an urban environment. So we're looking at smart cities and urban design. These are things that we have to fix and we have to get right now because they're not going away. They're only going to get bigger. So to move on to what we are doing in Scotland, and I'm going to look at 4 case studies here. But first of all, when you think of Scotland, quite a lot of people think of things like this. This is the Highlands, and it's all very pretty, and you think of things like Loch Ness Monster and haggis, castles. We've got a lot of those as well. And don't get me wrong, the importance of our rural areas should not be understated. But that's not where our people live. 91% of Scotland's population live in an urban environment. Not all cities, a lot of that is towns and villages as well. So when we're talking about what we need to do to move our cities, to move our population forward and benefit our people, we're looking at that urban design aspect, whilst not forgetting that there is obviously very important aspects to the countryside as well. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the benefits that we have seen of collaboration. What you can see on the map here is a map of Scotland has 8 cities. They're all very, very different. Dunfermline only became a city this year during the Queen's Jubilee, for example. In terms of the differences, there's massive differences in population size. Glasgow has about 600,000 people within the city, just about 1 million in the Greater Glasgow area. Inverness, up in the Highlands, has about 45,000 people in it. So really it's just a large town in some ways. And they all have different backgrounds as well. Aberdeen has been one of the oil and gas capitals of Europe. That is now fading. And it actually, I believe in the last couple of days, Aberdeen has been announced as the net zero capital of Scotland, which is an interesting step for somewhere that focused so heavily on oil and gas. So we're looking forward to seeing the details on that. Dundee has a previous very heavy focus on industrialisation. When the industry left, Dundee was pretty deprived for a while, but is now turning into an absolutely vibrant cultural centre, and also has a lot of work going on in the gaming industry, for example. A lot of game startups come out of the colleges and universities in Dundee. Edinburgh, everyone knows Edinburgh. It's absolutely beautiful. It's got castles. It looks like a fairy tale place, but also a heavy focus on finance as well as the cultural aspect. A lot of biomedical stuff is done in Edinburgh. And in Glasgow, as I said, where I spent most of my adult life, we had a heavy focus on industry and in Glasgow's case, it was shipbuilding. And when the shipbuilding closed down, the city went into, to be honest, a very severe period of depression. And it was only really in the 90s that Glasgow has started to regenerate and is now being seen as a cultural destination in its own right. It's now hosting major events. We had the Commonwealth Games there in 2014. We had COP26 there last year. So all the cities are changing and developing, and even today we're seeing changes in development happening. But what they have realised is that they are better working together, even though they're not that far apart. Between Glasgow and Inverness, 3 hours on a good day in a car, although I'll be honest, it'll probably take you longer. But by working together, they'll be able to embrace their differences and understand how they can develop at scale. So the city set up what's called the Scottish Cities Alliance. What I should say as well, all the things that I'm talking about here, there's extensive case studies and resources available online. I can share links with the organisers afterwards if you want to find out more about them. And this is a collaboration of Scotland's 8 cities working together to promote economic development. And one of the things that they have looked at is establishing what is called Scotland's Smart City. And it was Scotland's 8th city. It'll now be Scotland's 9th city because we've now got Dunfermline on board. But this is a £50 million project which had £20 million of ERDF funding, and it looked at 4 areas. It looked at open data, it looked at smart communities, smart services and smart infrastructure. Now, what they have done with that programme is shortly coming to an end. The funding is about to expire. But they've done multiple projects within that. They've looked at tackling fly tipping, for example. They've looked at smart waste collection, public safety, smart lighting. Glasgow did a smart canals project. There's a lot of information online about that. Intelligent street lighting, smart energy. And these are all things that if they'd done them individually, they probably they wouldn't have been able to achieve the impact at scale that they have. So by working together and addressing the problems that we have found in Scotland, that collaboration is important. And from someone who comes from an innovation centre, it's all about collaboration. I say we would like to look at is collaboration at a global scale as well. If you are doing things in Budapest, and you mentioned some very interesting examples earlier, we'd love to learn from that. If you've done something great, then let's not reinvent the wheel over and over again. Let's learn what we're doing on a global scale and make it work for us. The next area I'm going to talk about is how we're using data effectively. Now, in the built environment, it's safe to say we haven't always made data-based decisions. In fact, in the majority of the time, we don't make data-based decisions. And we're only really beginning to realise the potential of that for developing our built environment. So this is a project that Edinburgh City Council has looked at along with the University of Edinburgh. And it is a project looking at the concept of the 20-minute neighbourhood. Now, the 20-minute neighbourhood, if you haven't came across it before, it's a project that I think, to be honest, it's not a new concept. It's based on the idea that you're able to walk or cycle to something, say all the services, your place of work, schools, within 20 minutes of your house. Melbourne have done a lot of work on this. Portland in the US also have done a lot of work with this. Paris have a 15-minute neighbourhood concept. But as I say, it's not a new idea because cities used to be built around this. Older cities in particular, where you'd see the groups of communities working together. But as during the 20th century, as the car came along and people were able to travel a lot more, it kind of fell away a bit. What the Scottish Government are doing is they're heavily looking at the 20-minute neighbourhood concept. It's now been enshrined in the programme for government, so it is a big area of focus for the country right now. And the reason for that being that we see the benefits of not everyone cutting down on the commute. It has environmental benefits. It has benefits in terms of people not having to spend hours in their car. You know, they get to spend a better work-life balance, spend more time with their family. So Edinburgh City Council asked the University of Edinburgh to look at this and understand how it could work for them. What does a 20-minute neighbourhood concept look like? So the University of Edinburgh undertook a lot of mapping exercise, and they also did work with various stakeholders within the city, and they looked at identifying what are the key services now and what are they likely to be in the future. I think that's quite important for this project. Then by combining that with geographic information systems data, they were able to establish heat maps. And what you can see here, this is one of the centres in an area called Wester Hales. And what they were looking at here is where the GPs, where the pharmacies, food shops, schools, play areas, very important to consider as well. The outcomes of this project are now feeding into policy recommendations, and they're now feeding into the city development plan as well. So this is a really good example of where we're seeing data being used correctly, and then being used to make informed choices about the development of the city. Glasgow are also now looking at this as well, so we're starting to see that roll out across Scotland. The next area is how cities can be accessible for everyone. Cities are amazing places, but it's safe to say that they could be better for certain groups. If you're vulnerable, if you're in a minority, it may not. So the city experience may be very different for you. I know you have a presentation which I'm really looking forward to later on, specifically about gender. So what I'm going to talk about is the elderly and how cities can work more effectively for them. What we have found in Scotland, and certainly this has been made worse by the pandemic, was that when we're talking to our elderly, in general, there's a lot of issues with social isolation, how they are lonely, they're vulnerable, they may require additional support, which they might not be getting. And there's a big issue with digital literacy there as well, in a lot of areas too. So how can we work to make our cities better for the ageing? And we have an ageing population in Scotland and the UK as well. So let's face it, it's something that's going to happen to all of us, so we all have a vested interest in addressing this. So 2 projects in Scotland, one of which is completed and one of which is about to kick off. So an organisation called Architecture and Design Scotland, again a publicly funded body, they looked at this project called Town Centre Living, a Caring Place. This report is available online, as with everything I'm going to talk about. And what, by extensive consultation with stakeholders, they came up with 10 principles that should be integrated into planning decisions and how they can be looked at, and with the goal of making cities and towns a caring place. The outcomes of this project are that they work all together, they're what you would expect to see, but it's one of the first times that we've seen this actually documented and actually moving into policy. Architecture and Design Scotland have been working with Scotland's Town Centre Alliance, which is promoting the regeneration of town centres, and we're starting to see this move into policy as well. The other project that is just about to kick off is one called Healthy Ageing in Place, co-designing inclusive, resilient, age-friendly cities and communities, which is quite a mouthful, to be honest. But this project, and this is one that's being led by Harriet Watt with support from the University of York and also an organisation in Stockholm, is looking at what is the impact of climate change on the elderly. We know in terms of climate change, we're starting to see more severe storms, we're seeing flooding, we're also seeing very, very hot summers, something we're very much not used to in Scotland at all. But all of these can have a severe impact if you're more vulnerable and if you have underlying health conditions, and that tends to be what we see more in our elderly population. So this project is going to look at co-designing how can we come up with an inclusive, resilient city for the elderly. That project is about to start kick-off, so there's not that much information on that, but it's a 12-month project, so there'll be outcomes from that fairly soon. And by looking at both of these areas, I think it's important to say that if we fix these for a certain demographic in the elderly, these are things that will benefit all of us. But we're getting our age resilient cities is something that would benefit every group and not just those. So what we're trying to find out now is how do we look to make cities work for everyone? And the final area that I am going to talk about is how we incorporate sustainability in the heart of design, because sorry, that's what you get when you ask someone to speak who works for our organisation that promotes net zero. And this is a project and this is one that we are funding, and it's called the Edinburgh Homes Demonstrator. And this is looking at, it's a demonstrator showcasing a new model for the delivery of zero carbon off-site manufactured homes. It's on site, so this is a mock-up. Unfortunately, because it's on site, the pictures don't look that pretty yet, but we'll get to them fairly soon. And this is one that is working at scale. We are funding this, the Scottish Government's putting money into it, as our City of Edinburgh Council. And this is looking at a regeneration of an area called Edinburgh called Granton, which is a very industrial area, and up and recently has been, to be honest, a bit derelict. So we're looking at how can we build that into community. And some of the work that the GIS project I mentioned in Edinburgh, that's fed into this design as well. But what we're looking at with this, in the first phase, we're going to deliver 75 net zero carbon homes. They use zero emissions heating, and we're also piloting a community carbon strategy for that as well. These homes are on site, the construction has commenced. What's going to happen after that is that we are going to do a post-occupancy evaluation. University of Edinburgh are undertaking a substantial post-occupancy evaluation on this, which will run for at least 12 months, I believe. Taking all the outcomes of that, we're then going to feed that into a bigger development that will build 1,000 homes across the city and the Greater Edinburgh area. So what we're seeing here is, as I said, we have such a huge impact on the carbon emissions within the built environment. What we're seeing here is how we move it forward. How can we address at scale, because that's what we need to do, how can we address at scale the issues that we're facing? And that's something I would say is for all the examples that I have given here, we're looking to move at scale now because we have to. The climate change is increasing, the effects are increasing quickly, and we are in the UK, we're quite good at doing individual pilots, but we don't roll them out. So what we're looking now is how can we address that, get away from this cycle where we do something and then it falls off a cliff, and then we decide to do it again 5 years later. So I'd just like to conclude now with a quote from Antonio Guterres, who's Secretary General of the United Nations. And this is from the UN report in 2022 that I mentioned. And that's that cities and towns can spearhead innovations to bridge the inequalities gap, deliver climate action, and ensure a green and inclusive recovery from the pandemic. That is the challenge, and that is the opportunity we all face. We all know, I think, the fact that you're in this room, I think means that you have an understanding of the challenges. And let's not forget, these are massive opportunities for us as well. And by working together, working at an international level and collaboratively, that's how we're going to fix this. And that's how our cities and towns are going to be able to drive and spearhead this movement moving forward. So I would like to thank you for your time. I'm going to be here for the rest of the day. I know we don't have time for a Q&A, but my contact details are up there, or if there's anything you want to ask, it'd be great to speak to some of you in the break. And I look forward to you making connections, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the